News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. In the last couple of years, you might have heard about the emerging concept of personal coaching and wondered what that was. You might know that Tiger Woods, great a golfer as he is, he has a coach. At the University of Nevada, Reno, we've had a NCAA great football coach. But today we're going to talk about personal coaching and what that is and how that can really make a positive difference in people's life. We have an expert guest with us today, Brian Moore. Brian has been with us on some other shows, and we're really grateful that he's come back to talk with us about the positive difference that personal coaching can make. Brian is the Director of Human Resources at the Reno Tahoe International Airport, and he is a certified personal coach. Brian, it's great to have you back here to New Skills for Living.
Thanks for having me back.
Okay. So, Brian, I guess first of all, just an open-ended question. Can you tell us, what are the reasons that someone seeks out a personal coach?
Well, for a lot of reasons, Tom, but probably experiences that I've had would range from such areas as career coaching, personal challenges, whether it might be things such as public speaking, overcoming anxieties as it relates to situations on the job, even performance challenges that employees might have, or challenges on an interpersonal basis, whether it might have to be with fellow employees, whether it might have to be with their manager, I guess it would be more along those lines.
Yeah, Brian. Again, going back to that metaphor or analogy of Tiger Woods having a coach. I mean, obviously, he has a coach so that he can get better and be the best that he can be. Is that something that goes on where people will seek out a coach, is that they really want to improve and they want to be their best in all those different areas that you were discussing? And can you tell us a little bit more about each of those areas?
Yeah, it's. I think you stated it precisely with the opening of the show here, Tom, where you said, and you drew the analogy that those sports legends have coaches. And as you also indicated, this whole idea of having a personal coach is relatively new. And I think that it's been difficult for people to come to the realization that it's okay to have a coach to help them through some of the things I've talked about. I think people originally felt that to seek a coach out for those types of areas maybe showed some kind of a weakness. But why is it that then in a sports situation it becomes an obvious thing? If somebody's struggling with a particular sports skill, it's typical to go to a batting coach, to a fielding coach, to a golf coach, etc. Why isn't it then just as obvious, and why isn't it just as acceptable then for someone to seek out a coach in the non-physical side, but more the intellectual or the emotional side? And I think that's kind of where those come in. Relative to the career coaching that I've talked about, why isn't it then an acceptable practice for someone to sit back, take inventory of where they are today and say, is this where I want to be? How many times have you heard, Tom, all of us have heard individuals who are in a position, in a role, in a profession that maybe they struggle with, and really trying to assess, is this where I want to be today? Is this where I want to be tomorrow? Is this where I want to be 10 years from now? And trying to unfold that reality for them. Mm-hmm. So that in that realm, that's where a coach could definitely be beneficial, is to help kind of extract those thoughts and ideas about, is this where you really want to be? Is this where you're really getting your most fulfillment out? And if not, then how then do you go about finding that fulfillment? Yeah. Or even the interpersonal side, how then do you take this potential struggle that you may have in your interaction with somebody and try and step back again and ask yourself, one, what ownership do you have in the process? What ownership do you have in trying to help cultivate a better relationship, and not just pointing fingers externally and saying it's their fault, they own the issue. How much of that do you own?
Yeah. Brian, that sounds really great. Now, can you tell us some of the successes that you've seen in personal coaching?
Certainly. I've had circumstances, going back to the example I gave on the career side, where an employee was under the impression that they were happy in doing what they were doing, and in this process of, and you'll hear me say this a couple times, of peeling back this onion, peeling back the layers of this situation, and have seen employees come to this realization, this epiphany, that where they are today isn't where they do get that fulfillment. And I've seen this transformation of people to the point where they then take the courage to step outside of where they are now and then seek a different path.
Mm-hmm. Brian, that's a great example, and we want to return right after this brief break and hear more about personal coaching and the difference that it makes in people's lives. We'll see you in a minute. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. You'll see up on your screen the website easeap.com, and you'll be able to watch, if when you would like to, Brian Moore's interview in streaming video on that website. Also, there are about 30 other television shows of other guests that we've had talking about anxiety and depression and relationships, stress management, and other issues. So you would go to easeap.com to watch Brian's interview, as well as Dr. Steve Hayes, Dr. Jackie Pistorello, Dr. Suwat Yushar, and other guests that we've had on the show. And then I'd also like to remind you that there are over 90 newsletters addressing issues of depression, anxiety, relationships, how to know when our children are in trouble, how to be the best person that we can be. These newsletters, you can, of course, read them, or you can share them with others if you would like, or make copies and share them. So let's go ahead and get back to talking with Brian Moore. Brian, you were mentioning to us some of the successes that you've seen in personal coaching. Please tell us some more.
Outside of from the work realm, Tom, also on the personal coaching side, experiences that I've had with individuals who have maybe lost a loved one and trying to struggle to create an identity of where they are today. And I'm talking primarily individuals who are later in life, who maybe not have this desire to want to reconnect with somebody per se, but what does that mean now for them as they go forward being this single individual, and how do they create an identity for themselves? How do they create a path forward, and what's next? And I've had some very fulfilling experiences in helping individuals through that process, and again helping them to realize that exempt of another individual in their life, that they as themselves have value, they have purpose, and they have direction. So it's not just within the work setting, Tom, but also outside of that as well.
So Brian, tell us a little bit more about this process. How does coaching work?
Coaching establishes a partnership, and for this purpose I'll refer to them as a client. Coaching establishes a relationship and a partnership with the client, and remembering that it is the client's agenda. It's not the coach's agenda. It's not about me trying to drive in a certain direction, but it's about creating this partnership with the individual and then sitting into the position of the client and trying to help partner with them, not trying, but relating to them, partnering with them, and then helping them navigate to what's next. Remember I talked about that peeling back the onion.
Yeah.
That's the role of the coach, is being able to be that conduit to help expose options, and then allowing the client then to create their own revelation based on pulling back that onion and realizing what those options are.
So Brian, it sounds like it's really affirming, like right from the beginning you really affirm with the client, with the person, that you believe in them and they have this potential inside of them. And as a coach, you're going to help them realize this potential in their life and answer some of the questions that they have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us more about that process, though? It must be kind of difficult sometimes, because we're talking about personal growth here and facing challenges and maybe facing fears or overcoming difficulties or old scripts about who we are. So you and the client are really engaged in some real work here, aren't you?
Yeah, it's. I think one of the fundamental ingredients of developing that partnership, Tom, is creating a rapport with that individual and establishing that level of trust that in fact you are there for their benefit, not for my benefit, and you're there to help extract these options out for them, but then for them to allow them to take it where they want to go.
Yes, yes. That's an excellent way then. Brian, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this particular segment right now. And after this brief break, we're going to continue to explore this topic with Brian Moore. Hello, and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with Brian Moore, who is the Director of Human Resources for the Reno Tahoe International Airport, and he is a certified professional coach. So, Brian, would you please describe for us the steps in coaching?
Certainly. As I had mentioned to you prior to, one of the key ingredients is to establish a positive rapport with the client. First and foremost is establishing an agreement. It's critical to have that, Tom, because what it will really get into is identifying there's an expectation of the coach that what I will hear will be held in strictest confidence, will not be shared with anybody else. That helps with that trust basis. Yeah. But also helping the client to realize that they have ownership in the process too. This isn't going to be a process where the coach just gives out answers. And there's going to be that ownership on the part of the client to say, now what do I do with this information and what piece do I own, and there's accountability to it. So establishing that agreement with the client. Secondly, then, it's about identifying what the current state is today. We've always talked about this, that if you have no plan, then any path will get you there. But you got to know where you're starting from to begin with. So identifying with that client what exists today in its current state. Then transitioning from there, then saying, from that, what is the future state? What is the desired outcome that we want to try and achieve? And it's amazing, Tom, how many times I've been engaged in these coaching sessions where the client starts out with an understanding of what they think the desired outcome is, and after this process of peeling this onion back, realize that's really not where they want to get to all along. It was maybe the third step, but the eighth is really where they need to get to. So identifying what that future state is. Then from there is identifying the actions that they're going to need. Notice I said they, that they're going to need to start to take on in order to get to that future state, and in a joint fashion creating the plan to get there. Then from there is identifying, once you've got the identified actions and the identified path to get there, then what becomes the check and balance along the way to say that in fact the client is on track to be able to get to that desired outcome. If they're not, then what then becomes the course correction in order to get to that point. And then as the final step, then just becomes that check-in point with the client to just validate we're okay, we're on track to be able to get where we want to get to.
So Brian, let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. One of the steps then, an important step, after a client is clear about what is today, you're helping them develop a vision for the kind of life they'd like to have and the kind of person they'd like to be. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's kind of like within the realm of to thine own self be true. Like, who are you truly, and what are you called to become, and how do you manifest your talents and gifts in the world? Huh?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that envisioning process, how you support a client with that?
Yeah, it is just absolutely a series of questions, Tom. Open-ended questions to be able to come back and ask from a different perspective. So talk to me then, Tom, about how you're feeling about X, or share with me, Tom, about what that looks like in your mind. Or can you expand a little bit about what that frustration is today and what your struggle has been about it? So by asking those questions to pull that back, and from a coach's perspective, there's nothing more rewarding than after going at it, and sometimes it may take several whacks at the apple here, but when all of a sudden you see this transformation visually in the individual, in the client, to be able to see this revelation, this light bulb go on in their head to say, that's it. It's almost a eureka moment.
So in that eureka moment or that epiphany, I can imagine people might say, well, that's what I wanted when I was 20, but now I'm 45 and I don't want that anymore. Or maybe that's who my dad wanted me to be or my mom wanted me to be. So when you're talking about these different layers, you're helping people kind of find out who they are and who they aren't and what their true vision is, which is really exciting, Brian, that you're doing that work. But there has to be a pretty deep level of honesty and courage, doesn't there? Can you tell us about that?
On the part of the client?
Yes, on the part of the client.
Yeah, and as I said before, that honesty and courage doesn't happen right away.
Yeah.
I think that as you start to take these several whacks at the apple and you start to pull back little layers at a time where the client then in themselves can identify the reality associated with that, and that becomes their own validation to themselves that say, wow, we're creating this connection, and as such invite the process to go further.
So then, we have about a minute here, Brian, then you help them kind of develop the steps to how do they make that vision concrete, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you tell us a little bit about that, like in a half a minute?
Well, again, remember what I made the comment at the very beginning. It's not my agenda.
Yes.
It's their agenda.
Yeah.
And so helping that pathway to be more concrete is helping that client state back on what they understand that outcome to be, and then the coach to come back to them and say, you know, that's a validation. How do you feel about that? How do you see that panning out? How does that land with you? Is it seem to be getting for you what seems to be making the most sense?
Yeah, that's some great information, Brian. Thank you very much. And in this last segment, we're going to continue to take a look at how Brian works with folks to help them have a better life. Hello and welcome back. We're talking with Brian Moore about how personal coaching can help people have a better life. And Brian, would you please tell us what the guiding principles are under which you function in giving people guidance and support?
Certainly. Tom, it was an interesting personal revelation for me. I've been doing human resources, I think, since Noah was around.
I think
it
you're
certainly
right.
feels that way, and it looks that way too. And for the longest time, I did coaching for employees, or at least what I thought was coaching. And I felt good about it. It was the right thing to do. But I actually went through the formalized process, and you talked before about the whole certification process that formalized coaching takes. And so I did that. And what was an interesting process for me is realizing that there are these guiding principles associated with coaching that really make that engagement that much more real and that much more impactful, which was liberating for me. So you asked about some of the guiding principles, and I won't go through all of them, but I think there's some very key ones that give you a flavor of the key responsibility a coach really has in the engagement. One of the first ones is, and it was one of the ones I struggled with the most, and I'm sure the viewers, when they hear us, that some will struggle with it along with me, and that is that behind every behavior is a good intention. Imagine how important that is for a coach to truly embrace that. Because you can get involved in a coaching situation where now you're talking to a client, and a client shares something that maybe really challenges your own ethics, your own sense of values, etc. And how do you put that aside then so you can truly pull back the onion without that own agenda? You talk about people who've done...
Brian, but then also help that person get to the core of what that good intention really is.
Certainly, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to demonstrate to them that you haven't judged them. Imagine if you go to it with this perception of a judge, how then do you create this personal connection and partnership with somebody if they see you that now I'm being judged?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to do. And I struggled through that personally when I went through the coaching certification, spending time and really coming to grips about that whole concept. When you think about people out there who've done things that in our assessment might not be perceived to be a good outcome, but really understanding the intent was positive, the action getting there might not have been.
Yeah.
And we don't want to get involved in the action, it's about the intention behind it. That's not our intention, it's the client's.
Yes.
Another one is that people have all the necessary resources available to them. They already have them. But again, as we've talked about in the show already, the coach's asset is about then helping identify to the client within them what resources they already have to be able to accomplish whatever that outcome is that they want. You know, we've heard that expression about it's better to teach people to fish than it is to fish for them.
Yeah.
Well, that's what this is really doing, is teaching and coaching the individual on how to fish rather than do it for them.
To help them access their intelligence, their creativity, their desire to make a difference in the world. Those are the kind of resources that you help someone tap into, Brian?
Correct. And imagine, I mean, it can be frustrating on the part of the client because it's much easier for them just to have answers given to them rather than trying to give them the tools in order to do that.
Yes.
Another one is a choice is better than no choice. That indecision and not moving forward is almost imprisoning. When I shared with you some of these encounters I've had with people within a career where they almost made no choice, and that was just to sit where they are because why? It was more comfortable just to accept the status quo rather than to venture out and identify that maybe it is better to make a change. I'm not encouraging necessarily people to make a change in their jobs, but I'm saying that if you get to that realization that maybe you're not as happy where you are, then how then do you have that courage to take that next step? Okay?
Yes.
So those are some of the guiding principles that go along with the whole area of coaching, and there's 12 of these that you have to basically embrace and sign up to.
Brian, we have about a minute now, but I'm hearing that a coach is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that a coach is a really active listener who's very involved in wanting to help someone have a better life and is encouraging, but then also saying it's your life and it's your responsibility. So personal responsibility seems to be very important in this process.
Correct. Well, another one of the key principles is that we are each responsible for creating our own experience. And the reason why that's important to realize is that the client owns that.
The client
I don't own that. The client does.
And they own their own life.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. It's empowering.
Yeah. Brian, this has been some great information. I'm sure that you all benefited from hearing Brian. If you want to watch his interview again, that website is up on your screen where you can watch Brian's interview. And we'll see you again next month when we have another wonderful guest in New Skills for Living. Brian, thank you so much for coming and sharing
Thank you again for the invitation.
Your expertise and your wisdom.
My pleasure always. Thank you.
Brian.